of the building. It's not about the new courthouse. So we have a lot of meetings going on, and sometimes it's a challenge. I don't always get it straight. So I wanted to welcome you to City Hall in Nevada City. This is a county project, and Heidi's going to speak to that in a minute. But we're so thankful that the county's including us in this conversation because we actually live with the building every day. And it's such an icon, it's such an important statement in our city. So getting this right is going to be, I think, one of the most important things that we do in the next 5 or 10 years. And it's a big deal. So most all of you have been here before. You know where the bathrooms are in the back as you came through the door. Last thing, you keep your cell phone silenced. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Heidi, who's going to make some opening remarks, and then we'll introduce the team.
Thank you so much, Gary, and thanks for those of you who came out tonight. Honestly, I know Nevada City has opinions about everything, so I'm surprised there aren't more people here, but I think the word will get out, and it's really important that you are here, so we appreciate that. I am Heidi Hall. I'm the District 1 Supervisor for the county, which includes all of Nevada City, and one of the best parts of the job is that we work so cooperatively with the city on issues like this.
Here, here.
So we are excited to partner with Nevada City and to get your input on the future relocation of the Nevada City Courthouse. In addition to the meeting, I encourage you to sign up for email updates on the courthouse reuse at www.nevadacountyca.gov/courthouse. So just go to our website and then look for courthouse. As Gary mentioned, the Judicial Council of California has decided to build a new courthouse in a new location. Earliest we would see relocation is 2031. This meeting is not to discuss the future location of the courthouse. The court faces Facilities Advisory Committee's next meeting. Come on up.
Yep.
There's plenty of room. Is scheduled for November 5th from noon to 1, and a public video live stream link is available at courts.ca.gov. You can always email me or anybody here, and we will let you know how to participate in that as well. So why are we looking at the reuse of this courthouse that will be available starting in 2031? But, well, it's a long process, and we need a lot of input. We want a lot of input. We want to get it right. The county is 49% owner. The state is 51% owner of a more than 150-year-old building. And there's a lot of work that's going to need to be done with it. And once the court vacates the premises, the county will be in charge of the future of the building. So we don't want the current courthouse to end up being a vacant zombie building any more than Nevada City does. And that's why we are working together. This has to work for the county economically, and this has to work for the city and culturally and visually as well. So what have we done to date? We have established a courthouse steering committee to engage the city and the county in a coordinated plan for the reuse of the facility. The committee, and that's why we're here today. We've been meeting for almost a year now, I'd say. So the committee will seek to take all the necessary steps to ensure a timely and seamless transition from the court's operation to a new use, and to prevent the facility from degrading and standing vacant. That's really important to all of us. So we approved a contract with Nelson, an architectural firm with offices in Northern California, to conduct a highest and best use study, which is the thing you do with something like this, to develop recommendations for the building's future in consultation with the community. And you're going to hear about that today. What's important about that is we have experts who know what's going on with buildings like this in other parts of the state and even country. So we're using their expertise to help us come up with really the best options. So today, what we're here for is to discuss the project and seek your input. You'll get a presentation first, and then we definitely are going to want to hear from you. And we want to ensure that the recommendations that come out of this are in alignment with the community's values. And that includes our historic character, our aesthetics, and to support the concepts that we all find important. And we want to make sure that any recommendations are viable economically and commercially, and that the future uses are sustainable. I have to emphasize, we're open to all your ideas, no matter how crazy they are. ultimately, because this is in the county's control and it's gonna cost less money, we need something that's gonna work, that's gonna be economically viable. So a second community meeting will be scheduled after we compile all the information from this first meeting, and developing project concepts and evaluating them to regarding the highest and best use will be expected this winter. A Board of Supervisors presentation will follow in the late winter, early spring, and ultimately an RFP will be issued and the property will likely be sold for development with conditions reflecting the results of the Courthouse reuse study, which will incorporate all of your ideas. So now to get to the meat of the meeting, to dive into the purpose, I'd like to introduce David Crotty, who's going to be, and his team, who's going to be taking over the presentation from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. I am David Crotty. I'm an architect with Nelson Worldwide. Really happy to be here and really excited to share with you what we've worked on so far and to start getting your feedback. One of the things I want to really emphasize is that we're at the very beginning of our studies here. And we think we're at the right time right now that we have some real ideas to share with you. But we haven't gone so far that we can't go back. So we think we're at the right point now to start getting community feedback. And we try to time these things, exactly that way. So thank you for coming and giving us a little bit of feedback. So I think Heidi gave you a pretty good sense of where we stand right now with the project, and it really is sort of at the beginning. We know the courts are moving out, so the building will remain vacant. And we're looking at this really in sort of two basic ways for highest and best use. Number one, and this is to the economic viability, obviously very important. What can go in this area? What can fit in this site that actually serves the community well? And then we're looking at, so that's from an economic perspective, and Dina's going to talk a little bit more about that.
That's me.
And she talks about that during the real estate market assessment. And then we're going to go to the design approach, and that's when Greg is going to talk about, okay, so what do we do to the building? We understand that there are, the building has a lot of value to the community. We understand that tower is really important. So we're going to play with some ideas with the design to try to figure out, what is acceptable to the community in order to, affect this building. So this is where, we can hear from you. And we're going to share with you some ideas that might be a little out there as well. Heidi was saying, all ideas are good. So we're going to push the limits. We're going to try to bracket these ideas and get your feedback where, they are with you. So that's the design approach. And then we're going to go through an evaluation. What we like to do. Thank you.
Can you hear me through the mic?
It's not going to give audio in here, but it'll give it to the folks that are live streaming. For people at home.
Okay, so it's a little weird not to actually hear it. I guess I used to do this as a kid with chicken wings. Okay, so evaluation. So what the evaluation is that we're going to come up with some options, and we want to be able to figure out, okay, what of these options actually is the highest and best use? How do you evaluate something like this? So we've come up with a beginning way to evaluate this, and we want to share it with you to get your feedback. Hear from you if this actually makes sense in terms of how to evaluate. And then finally, we're going to be doing next steps and final thoughts. So we'll have an opportunity for anything that we didn't capture during this presentation. Assuming that there's enough time at the end, everyone can get a chance to just sort of say what their feelings are. So it's your best opportunity for anything that we didn't cover. Now, I do want to say that in between each one of these agenda items, we're going to have a little pause, and there's a program called Mentimeter. And so most people say when you come to a presentation like this, everyone please turn off your phones. Well, everyone please pull out your phones, because the Mentimeter is going to be a way for you to provide sort of live feedback to us. We have a few questions about each of the different components as we present them, and it gives you an opportunity to present any thoughts that you have at that moment. So feel free to use that. We have QR codes are posted along the wall there. And we'll also be sharing the QR codes in the presentation. So you'll have many opportunities to actually get that going.
So you're saying we can't actually just raise our hand?
You know, you can, of course, you can do that too. We'd like to give Mentimeter a try, but if you're finding that it's not working for what you want it to say, we're here to listen. And if you need any help with it, we'll have people that can help as well. But
You don't have to download an app either.
Yeah, it's
just- Yeah.
it's pretty simple. But yeah.
So we'll have staff that can help and just wave us down, and I'll stand in the back if anyone needs help.
They'll hold my hand up.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is the QR code and the site. Okay, so this is the project introduction. So I'll go through this a little bit quick since we already have, I think, a pretty good idea of the background and the project description. Basically, the courthouse is currently used. We know that the folks that are going to the courthouse are also going out into the community and providing, they're buying lunch and part of the community. So this project description, as Heidi was mentioning, really is just about finding out, once the courts leave the building, what should we do with this site? So what we started with is the Nelson team that you see here, and we have folks behind us as well that you don't see that support. They met with Nevada County, Nevada City, and some stakeholders, and we called them the steering committee. And we met with the steering committee, and we created a visioning session. And what the visioning session does is it allows us to really understand what the big ideas, the aspirations, the goals are for the project, and what the fears are for the project as well. What we heard is that we wanted to make sure that we increased and had valuable economic activity. Whatever we put in here, we want to make sure that it allows for increased and valuable economic activity. Renewed community vibrancy. We really wanted to make sure that we engaged the community. Created community pride. And the actual architecture itself was a look that honors the historic context. And it could be a national attraction. It could be something that draws in folks from all over the place. There needs to be a successful city-county partnership. They understood the value of having the different government agencies work well together, and they are. And it could be an investment magnet. So these are the things that we were sort of searching for, looking toward. And then we had the avoid, and I've heard already a few times now, to avoid the vacant zombie building. So I think sort of that overarching fear of whatever we do in there, it just needs to succeed. If everybody wants a bowling alley, which bowling is awesome, I love bowling, but if it doesn't provide any economic incentive, if it doesn't succeed in the long run, a bowling alley isn't going to succeed. It's not going to be the highest and best use. We want to make sure that we don't have divided community. Whatever we're doing here, we're hoping that this project can help bring the community more together and not separate it. We don't want to have an unpopular use. We don't want something trendy or dated. We don't want it to be here tomorrow or here today and gone tomorrow. We don't want it to be disruptive to the community. We understand that there's going to be some inherent disruption with the project, but how can we minimize that? And then, of course, we want to avoid lack of long-term feasibility, which is another way of saying we want to make sure this stays viable for quite some time, and we want to avoid poor public process. So we took all these ideas, the steering committee, and we sort of boiled it down to two general ideas. One, most importantly perhaps, it needs to be economically viable. It needs to be something that can withstand the time. And then secondly, to meet the community values. I mean, it doesn't do any good if it's economically viable if everybody hates it. So those are the two important things that we came out of our community or our steering committee meeting. And then sort of the end part is North Star. So as we develop these options, we're going to be looking back at this sort of sentence here and saying, are we achieving this? It's quite simple. We want a beautiful and vibrant space that's viable, sustainable, and generates community pride. Okay, so that's the end of section 1, and now we're going to allow just some basic feedback on Mentimeter. Put this down. Dina, I think you're going to be next.
pause here for a moment.
If anyone needs help, please let us know.
How do you do it?
So you go to your camera.
It's just saying, it's just a
Yep, so that's where it's gonna be right now.
Yeah.
I'm in the
Okay.
right place.
You're in the right place.
Okay, so yeah, if that's what you see, you're good. Bear with me one second, we'll let everyone catch up to you.
See it, the living room, about it. I saw your book, by the way.
Do we define economic?
Big question, we'll talk about that.
Oh, there you go.
Well, let me know. One phone, one vote.
No rigging the votes.
So if you don't have a phone, how can they engage in the whole process?
Casey will go and ask you for your response if you don't have a phone, and he'll log it in for you, if anybody doesn't have a phone. We'll log in your votes. Hey, Casey, could you help that gentleman?
Well, everyone
Oh,
is playing with their phones. This meeting could progress with somebody asking a short, basic question. May I? Okay. The parameters of use that you established. It seems like Nevada City needs a baseline that if this, as I believe, is functionally obsolescent and not subject in any way to any kind of productive future use, the county and the state need to provide the funds to demolish and detoxify the building and then auction it off so that the market can decide a highest and best use. I don't think highest and best use is decided by committee.
So you don't agree with the goals? Sounds like.
He's got a different goal,
Yeah.
an additional goal.
I mean, I think the building is, I've been in it, you know, I've been in the courtrooms. I think it's, as I say, politely, functionally obsolescent. It was originally poorly designed. The monument, which a lot of people here, I guess, grew up with, and so it's part of it's part of the community, I think is another horrible example of art by committee back in the day. But those are my opinions.
Yeah.
But we need a guarantee from the state and from the county that Nevada City, we're not going to be able to replace all of the economic activity that the courthouse has provided. I mean, maybe we will be, but we don't know that. But what we can do is to avoid a zombie building with a lot of toxics in it. So we need to make sure that we're funded for a demolition, an auction, and a resale so that the market can decide what the site is worth and what it's going to be used for.
Yeah, I hear
Highest
you.
and best use.
I hear you. And I can say that, you know, once we start getting into our presentation a little bit more, you'll start to see that we're looking at some pretty wide options. One of them could actually be demolishing the entire thing.
Good.
So we're not trying to exclude any options like what you're suggesting. What we're trying to do right now is just through the experience that we have with this type of project, we're trying to see what could possibly be the most viable.
I just didn't want to get caught up in the process here.
I'm worried about the
Wait,
process.
yeah, well, the process, it looks like we've already got 24 people who are working with it. We're getting some good feedback that, granted, it takes a moment at the beginning, but I think once we've got this thing going, it'll iron itself
I have a
out.
comment.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes I'm an architect as well. Sometimes you start by getting the public comment first before you show the building, for example. So, in other words, what might the uses be? Well, you know, we in Nevada City need housing like there's no tomorrow, and we love commercial on the bottom. So, and as an architect, I did a project in San Francisco, very similar, and in Oakland, very similar. You know, it's doable. You can carve up anything to make it work in the end. So, where do you plan on hearing use ideas?
Well, I was going through it at the beginning. So what we're doing right now is giving an introduction. Then we're going to go through the economic analysis, which gets into uses like housing, like commercial. After that, then we're going to go over sort of the approach to the building. That's the design side of things. Then we'll go over the evaluation, how we're going to evaluate each of these different options. And then we have time for anyone that didn't have an opportunity to, give any comments. That's your opportunity for anything that you missed. So I think we're going to cover what you're talking about.
We're going to get to it.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
that's our goal here. Thank you. Okay.
Is there another,
Well, so-
next question?
I'll just say that, so it looks like people generally agree with our project goals, and I understand we're never going to get absolute consensus with things, but it's good just to get a general feedback, so thank you. Now we'll go to the next question. So with this, you can type in words, get, whatever you want, whatever you want.
So what are you typing?
Right here, just click right there. Yeah, you can start typing. Would anyone like assistance that can put your comments on the screen? Just let me know.
Okay, great comments.
These are good comments. Thank you.
Really great comments. And we are, even though, even if we don't talk about every comment right now, but all this stuff is documented, so we are taking note of every single comment.
No trolling.
Okay, so I'm seeing two general themes. One is about the community and making sure that the community is participating. So this is what we are attempting to start right here, right now. And then secondarily, there seems to be some concern about the economic viability, people before economics. So that's something I think maybe we'll get into a little bit more, but part of this really is making sure that whatever goes into this remains. We don't want it to become that zombie building. So that economic viability is something that we're trying to balance. All right, so I'm going to move on, and moving on to my friend Dina.
Okay, I have to do the microphone. Okay. Good evening, I'm Dina Belzer. I'm with Strategic Economics. We're an urban economics consulting firm. I am based in Berkeley, and as I like to say to people all over the country, I'm from Berkeley, but I believe in the market. Okay? So that's what I'm here to talk to you about tonight, is the market, right? So this question of economic viability. And what does that mean? And my friend here in the front row said, do we get to define economic viability? And the answer is no. What defines economic viability is whoever has the money, right, to do a project like this. So this gets to our friend, the architect over here. Thank you for wearing black. We know who you are, right? Right, very helpful. An investor is going to come in with the money and invest the money and get a return. So that's my job is to look at what the market would deliver if the market were going to come in here and put their capital at risk, right? And that's what a highest and best use study is, and that's what defines economic viability. Now, there might be other sources of money that could pay for all kinds of things here, but it would be then incumbent on those users to find the money to do it. In other words, you can't say, well, the county should do this or the county should do that. Now, to your point, sir, about the condition of the building and who's going to pay for that, that is really to be determined, because it may be that because of the toxics, the asbestos, and whatever else is in that building. I did walk through it this afternoon and I saw some of the nasty stuff, so I've seen it now too. It may be too expensive and no one could do it. And so then what do we do? So this is going to be an iterative process, and this is why we're starting now. As Heidi said, we have 5-6 years before the courthouse closes and relocates, and it could take all that time to get this sorted out. This is very typical of what happens with an obsolete asset like this, right? It takes time and it often takes iteration, and sometimes it takes multiple shots at the development community. Real estate markets are dynamic, they're moving all the time. So what I'm going to report out to you today is if we were putting this parcel on the market today, what would the most likely use be? I'm thinking that this story is not going to change dramatically in 5 years. The finances may change depending on what's going on with the market. As you probably all know, we're coming out of a very extreme inflationary period. It's tied up interest rates and financing. Every real estate project in the country is stalled out right now. But as interest rates have gone down, we're starting to see activity. We're starting to see cranes again. So these are all things to keep in mind: short-term, long-term, what's going to happen, and who's going to pay, right? And in the end, it could be that the state and the county do have to pay in order to take the level of risk down to a point where someone's really willing to put their capital at risk. And I think that's a very important point, right? Or even if someone says, I have a use, I'm a user, I want to come in here and do this, the community really wants this use, I can pay for the use if the costs are this, but I can't afford to pay to remediate the site. So your point is very well taken. It's totally appropriate, and we're taking all those things into consideration now, because we have to know, right? This has to be involved. So that's really my job here, is to show you what we learned from looking at the market, and sort of report out on what we heard in response to the list that the steering committee came up with. So next slide, please. If I go too long, just tell me I'm timing out. But I want to be sure that we're all on the same page here, right? So what happened was the steering committee was tasked with coming up with a broad list of uses, a brainstorming session, if you will. And I'm pretty sure that it's very likely that if we had a big community meeting, that the community would come up with some variation on the same list of kind of uses. So the first use is residential housing. Office, cannabis industry, people talked about. Would we put some kind of retail or grocery store there? How about hospitality, which essentially is a hotel? Would we just do parking there to support the downtown, which is parking constrained? What about institutional uses? So these are uses where you wouldn't have a developer come in with their capital, but you would have a user come in and say, I want to raise the money to do this use. That would be a museum, maybe a government agency, maybe a university or some other kind of campus, something to do with health and wellness, something to do with sports and recreation. Right? So that's kind of the broad list of things that we started with in terms of looking at the market and really testing each of these ideas. So that's what I'm going to go through with you tonight and explain to you what we found, right? So this is how we define economic viability. Okay, so what we did was we talked to subject matter experts here locally. So Locke Richards, Stuart Baker, Kimberly, who's here tonight, Gil Matthew, Kristen York with us here at Business Council, Gary Tingle. We had an exchange with somebody from Sierra Nevada Memorial Hospital, and then we looked at all these reports and all this data that comes out both from the public sector and on the private sector side regarding kind of the real estate market conditions. So we tried to really look both qualitatively and quantitatively at what's there. The first thing that you always have to do with any real estate development project is look at the site. Where's the site located? Because every user and every use has an optimal site criteria. Anybody who knows anything about real estate knows that there are 3 critical criteria for the success of a project, and they are location, location, and location, right? I know, it's a bad joke, but that's what we started with. So we said we have a 1-acre site, we have an 80,000 square foot historic courthouse plus the annex building, and we have a 1/2-acre satellite. The site's constraints are, it's not right on the retail strip, it's right up Pine Street, you could see it from Broad, but it's not right on Broad Street. That hill is a little steep, okay, I'm happy to say I'm fit enough to walk it without breathing too hard, even though I'm at altitude, but not everybody necessarily wants to do that walk. And then it's tight on the parking. And parking is important in this region. This is not like my neighborhood where I live, where I can hop on BART and pretty much get to anywhere in the world. This is not that, right? So people need cars, or they need vehicles of some sort. The site's assets are that the building has architectural significance. Not everybody loves the building, fair enough, but a lot of people, I think, do love it. And it also has a history to it. For many people who did grow up here. It's part of the historic downtown, no question. And then finally, it's not maybe directly on the main street, but it is part of this very beautiful and vibrant downtown. So this is what we took into account. We started by looking at the population growth trends because places that are growing are typically places that are going to attract more economic investment, right? But what we see actually is that Nevada County's population is declining. So it's shrinking and it's getting older, right? So this is a little bit tricky because if you're not like a booming place, then that has implications for the other kinds of uses. On the other hand, as you'll see in a minute, there's still a lot of demand for housing in this county. So even if the population isn't like booming, there's still demand for housing. So next slide, please. We also looked at employment trends because people who are going to fill the jobs in the industries that are growing are consumers who are likely to need or want housing. And it also tells us something about what the housing market might be. So what we saw is that that also there will be employment growth, but most of it will be in government, it'll be in education, healthcare, social services, the leisure and hospitality. Manufacturing is shrinking, and as Kimberly said to me so succinctly earlier, that this used to be a place with a tech, you had tech manufacturing. Both of the two tech companies that you had both relocated because partly because, as I understand it, they had tapped out the workforce here, right? And they needed to relocate to places where they had a bigger pool of workers that they could call on. So the importance of the quality of your workforce actually has a lot to do with what kinds of businesses are here. And the problem is that most tech industries tend to cluster, and they cluster where there are a lot of people with the education and training that they're looking for. So this makes Nevada County a little bit tricky for kind of replacing tech industry with tech industry. The other thing is that more than 3,000 workers commute into Nevada City every day to take jobs here. You've got courthouse jobs, you've got downtown, you've got other kinds of jobs. And then people also commute out. But the people who commute in are young. They're in their 30s, and a lot of them work in the service industry. So this begins to tell us something about the shape of housing demand. So we know that there are people who are aging, who need housing, and then there are young people in the workforce who also likely need housing, right? So this is how all these bits of the mosaic fit together. Next slide, please. So when we looked at the housing market in particular, what we see is that the median, that's the 50% of prices are above and 50% are below. What's right in the middle there is the median house price. House prices increased in the last 5 years by $100,000. That's a lot of money, particularly in a high interest rate environment. During the same time, though, housing prices in Truckee nearly doubled. Right? So what that's going to do, too, is potentially put more pressure on Nevada City's housing market. And the experts that we talked to said there's definitely strong demand for housing. So this is to your point, sir, about what the highest and best use is. That there's just evidence of a lot of demand for housing in this area. Apartments, there's also strong demand, and there's a lot of demand for 1 and 2 bedroom units. Again, we're getting this more qualitatively, but the vacancy rates, although this is the vacancy rate chart, it looks like it's fluctuating, it never gets above 3%. And if you're in a healthy housing market, your vacancy rate is at 5%. So 3% is still very tight, right? So housing demand, big thumbs up. Next. Office not so rosy, right? Nevada City has had a net loss of occupied office space, about 45,000 square feet. That's about half of the amount of space that's in the courthouse and the annex, just to give you an idea. Nevada City office buildings have lower rents than Truckee for sure, and they're even lower than they are in Grass Valley. So for the kinds of users that are going into office space, they're not showing a strong preference for Nevada City. And then a lot of the office tenants want businesses that have parking and that are less parking constrained than downtown. So they're looking for places that have easy freeway access potentially and have parking. Next. So office maybe comes down. Okay, so retail. So we talked about maybe we would do a mixed-use building here, a grocery store here. But the problem is that this is not a good retail site. Again, there's not enough parking. Retail demand is also likely to decrease rather than increase because the population is shrinking. So there's a direct correlation between population and retail activity. And so there might be some kind of retail use that could go in as a ground floor use in a mixed use building, but it's not an ideal use location for retail. We didn't find demand for a grocery store. The one suggestion that we did get from a local gentleman was to do some kind of a food hall or a food incubator that would, do kind of made in Nevada County food. There are a lot of examples of these commercial kitchens where a lot of people make things collectively and use those kitchens to produce a variety of things. And then you could sell that. I was in Eureka recently. You could go into the Made in Humboldt County store and buy cheese and honey-based products and whatever else, wine, a lot of wine there. So that's a possibility, but that's a one-off. And you would need somebody to come in and run that. And you would need somebody to capitalize that in some way. So it's an interesting idea. And because it was suggested by somebody here locally, we're keeping it in the mix for now. But yeah, hospitality. So Nevada City's hotel room demand actually drops during the winter, and it's really strongest during the summer. The hotels here have lower rates than Truckee, but again, Truckee's right there by Tahoe. But one of the things that's happening in Nevada City and in the Grass Valley, Nevada City areas, there is an increasing interest in the arts. They're performing arts here, these concert series, and the question is, and there's Black Box Theater and some other things that are sort of being developed in Grass Valley. So the question is, if we have more hotel rooms, would people stay longer? And the answer is potentially yes. So we think that a hotel is maybe a use here. And we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do to follow up on some of these things in a minute. So that's hospitality. And now, just quickly, these other uses. In our interviews with people, we spoke to the county. There's not really an interest in the county occupying when, I think, sir, you raised a point about case studies. If we looked at what's happened with other courthouse reuse, we have in California, other places around the country, and what we see most typically is that they are reoccupied by the public sector or potentially by a medical facility. We saw one courthouse that became a county a clinic, and it had a whole bunch of wellness activities. But when we spoke to the hospital person, he said, no, that's a terrible location for us. We're not interested. We couldn't find any educational, institutional users, again, who were likely suspects. That doesn't mean that somebody might not come in at some point and do this, but it's not a use you want to hang your hat on. When we're talking about economic viability and what someone would come in and actually put money at risk for, you don't want to plan for one of these uses because they're uncertain, right? You want a use that you think, okay, even if we need to de-risk the project, as we say, by doing all the hazmat remediation, doing whatever to the buildings to make them either to go away or more viable, we still, in the end, want an investor to come in and take this project on. And these are not that. So, next slide. So, yeah, as I said, there are no clear sources of demand for any of these things. So, next slide. So, yeah, the hospital and physician offices, we didn't see any demand. Again, these are very parking-dependent uses. Medical offices in particular. People talk to us about, well, we could do something that's wellness themed. We have all these wellness practitioners, and that's true, but ultimately those wellness people are pretty much occupying what's office space, right? So there's a lot of office space that's already available, and nobody has come forward and said, I want to open a wellness facility of some sort here. So again, we couldn't count on that. And then somebody suggested a wellness facility. We really need a gym, but we understand there was a gym in Nevada City that recently closed. So no market support. So next slide. I'm almost done. So what we're saying is that the primary driving or sort of economic highest and best uses for the site, are housing. The pros of housing are strong local and regional demand, and that it could really bring workforce stability. We're working in other communities like this that are transitioning more into kind of a visitor serving, but also with medical facilities. And the first responders can't live in the community, it's too expensive. So housing for workforce is very important. It might be very expensive to reuse these existing buildings, so that's a con. So we talk to people about senior housing, market rate housing, which means just the market would do it, or is there some kind of subsidized housing where there would be a subsidy that would come from the state and potentially the city. A hotel, there is some recent growth in hotel demand, and there is a unique historic building here, so there is a lot of track record for reusing historic buildings for hotels. But the downside of this is that if you're going to do something really high quality or something like the National Exchange, your room rates are going to be very high, right? So it's expensive, so it's tricky to see whether or not there's actually demand for that. But the good thing about a hotel is that you could then have a wellness facility as part of that. So that might create an umbrella for one of the kinds of uses that people were interested in. So next slide. I think this is pretty much it. And then there are all these other ideas out there that could go on a ground floor, they could go in a small part of the building. That's not to say that none of these things could happen on the building, it's just that they would not be the primary use. So we're thinking of these as more supportive uses, and maybe there's some space that's created for them in the final building. But this is not what somebody's going to come in and invest their money and look for a return to provide one of these kinds of uses. Next slide. So the next steps is that we're going to work with Greg and David and Casey on the land use alternatives, like how now we know that we're really pretty much focused on housing. We thought we would have maybe a wider range of potential uses here, and the market just doesn't bear that out. And I don't think that surprises anybody, given your comments earlier and what you're also saying, sir. And that's what we're here to do, is to just give a little reality check that this is not like just an exercise in imagination, but really who's going to put up money for this. We're going to test some physical alternatives, and we'll actually do the financial feasibility on that. So we'll be able to take into account, I really appreciate your comments about the remediation of hazardous materials that are in that building, because then we can build in some factor for that when we look at what the costs are for reusing the building. So the next time you see me, I'll be here to talk about these rough order of magnitude pro forma analyses and what we're finding on the feasibility of the physical alternatives that we're going to talk about next. So I'm going to stop there. And we have some questions for you that are about the Mentimeter questions that are really to help us understand a little bit more about what your priorities are around housing. Do you want rental units? Do you want units that would be for sale? Do you want some mix of both? What would be your preference? Building type is also tied to is it a rental? Would it be more likely to be an apartment building? Is it for sale? Maybe we would do condos or townhouses or something like that. So that's why we're asking this question. So, okay, good. Next, can we do the next question?
Let's give it a second.
Okay.
Let it-
What is it, a website?
Yeah.
I'm a little late.
So if you scan the top QR code.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So, in all of those uses, et cetera, there's also a serious land use issue in Nevada County, which is if you take your eyes out of focus, you see that we're becoming much more disparate, i.e., if you think about things like, global warming, proximity plays a big role. And if you look at all the new town stuff, so for example, that's perfect location for medical offices, as you might have implied. But the point is that since the last 20 years, we've built like 5 medical offices in the hinterland.
Right.
And that, everybody drives to those. There's a reason they have those huge parking lots, because everybody drives to those. I could see serious medical offices here. I mean, if we can figure out a bus system that can get people here and drop them off, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
We have, and, our housing is going to the hinterland, too. So we have the worst of future land use problems here in the way of global warming, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair point. I think that the market is at least the feedback we're getting, the market's more likely to deliver housing in this location than it is medical offices. And the medical offices will require more parking, too, likely. Yeah.
It's like all these ideas, what about the parking?
Right.
I live a block
We're going to
behind
talk
this.
about parking in a minute, because parking is a huge issue. So hold the parking thought.
Okay.
Yeah.
If the state owns 51%, are they on the hook for any of the remediation of the hospital?
That is the question was, if the state owns 51%, are they on the hook for the remediation? I think that's TBD. I don't think we really know yet, but I think that there probably will have to be some kind of serious conversation about what the public sector can do to take down the cost to develop this so that it's actually feasible. So who's going to pay for that and how that's going to be? Yeah, I think that's going to be a negotiation. Yes, sir.
It seems like the question might come up with different answers if you define rental units as long or short-term rental units.
Fair enough. Right, it's a great point. Thank you. Okay, is it important to have a hotel on the site? We'll come back to that. I'm registering your comments, right?
David, just out of curiosity, do you know how many responses we got on that last one?
It was in this one.
27 plus.
Just about everybody there.
Okay, so not much of a preference for a hotel.
You're probably aware, I believe it's still for the national went up for sale. I have to think it's because they're not covering their.
We're going to speak to the national later this week. We're talking to those guys, so we'll have more information on that.
Else is not coming up. This one's not.
It's just registering here.
I mean, the importance of a hotel.
Their investment.
Next, is that what you're saying? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, next, I think that might be
That's about it.
it. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Greg. Oh, one more. Oh, anybody? I think we already sorted on the answer to this, but please respond. Sounds like there's a strong preference for housing. Is that fair?
Like people in the downtown.
People
who are here for whatever reason.
I want to say also, we did the economic impact analysis for the courthouse reuse, and really documented what the courthouse does contribute to the downtown. So I know all about that. So,
Just want to do this one.
so this is the last one, is how important do you think it is to have something else in the building besides housing? Whatever it is, a little bit of retail or services or something else. Okay, great. So preference for mixed use. Okay, is that it?
That is it.
Okay, thank you very much. Very helpful feedback. So we're following up now. We're talking in more detail to both residential developers, both affordable developers and market rate developers. We're talking to the hotel people. We're getting our assumptions lined up so we can put together these pro formas, the financial models, basically to test feasibility. So that'll be our next step. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tina. Hi, guys. I'm Greg Lehman. I'm an architect with Nelson Architects, and we're working hand in hand with Dina's firm. So she's putting together what kind of uses really are going to be successful here, and what is the market saying that could pencil out for some kind of future development. But there's another part of the equation to how a project can pencil out, is that's just how much of a project can you build. And there are certain things that really influence us as architects for just basically the rules of how much of a project we can design. So I'm just gonna start by saying that, you know, we aren't coming here today with design solutions because there's been a lot of ideas about what possible uses are. We didn't want to presume that we're going to just take off and start designing the many different possible uses. We want to first see what the market says, see what all of our studies say, and then get input from the community before we start really looking at and testing the site for how much housing can we get on the site, how much parking, how much of a hotel. So anyway, what I wanted to talk about today, if you want to advance, is just some of the, in a way, the rules of the game that we have to deal with as architects that sort of define how big of a project we can do. And I know there's a ton of info here. It's probably too small to read. We're just trying to capture kind of what the zoning rules and all the regulations are, but I'm just going to hit the high level. And the first thing is that the site, the main site where the courthouse currently exists, is surrounded on three sides by this purple zone, general business. That's kind of what we're sitting in right now. So the site is in the general business zone, but it is bound on one side by residential. So we want to be much more sensitive to that side of the building. And then the zoning regulations have a little bit more stipulations about being adjacent to a residential, which we'll talk about. So we have to basically set the building back from the residential area. And then we're identifying this secondary site, which is where the surface parking lot is that a lot of people who are using the courthouse, the jurors and things of that nature, are using. So that surface site, lot, if you're familiar with it, very, very steep. It's bound on one side by the general business, one side by office and professional, two sides by residential. So lots of different zones there. So those are the kinds of things that are starting to define how big of a project we can build. I know you guys probably are very familiar with the site. This block, it's very, very dense. The building currently is built right up on the property line. It's packed, right? So that's one thing about the site. It's very dense right now, and it sits on this steep slope. Those things are things that are going to impact us. I guess I'll continue with those ideas on the next slide. So hopefully you can read the footprint of these buildings. When we were talking about how these zones on the three sides are the general business zone, the residential zone is up here to the north. Currently, these buildings are built right up to the property line, but the setback requirements to the residential zone say setback 9 feet. So we're already starting the project with a little less land than that you're currently using. So the site's shrinking, if you will, if we're following the current zoning regulations. So yeah, go ahead. So there's another thing that's really vital, I think, about how big of a project we can build, and that's how tall can the building be. And the zoning is saying 40 feet. And so that's a reasonable height. But in this, on this site, because the slope on the sides of the project are so steep, we measure the 40 feet from basically the average. So in the high point of the site, the building can only be, it's going to be shorter than the 40-foot zoning regulation. So in a way, the steepness of the site is going to be limiting us. I think this is actually one of the bigger limiting factors to how much housing, for example, can we build there. We're feeling like most likely on this back side of the site, adjacent to the residential zone where there are other small single-family homes, probably we could only get a couple stories out of that. And that's not going to be a lot for a developer to put a lot of units in. So we're going to be testing those building heights, the floor-to-floor heights, basically see how much product we can get on the site. But the steepness of the site is definitely one of the big factors that are going to influence how much we can build here. And then the other really big one, this is probably a bigger issue, is the parking. So right now, underneath the annex building, it's basically like 2/3 of the footprint of the building is this sort of semi-underground parking, 32 spaces. And then in the satellite surface lot, just diagonal from the site, 42 spaces. So immediately this sort of forms by the parking regulations in the zoning ordinance. There's a certain number of spaces required for each housing unit. So if we assume we're only going to park cars on the site with the existing surface lot, and even if it's a new development, we're going to make use of that underground parking. We're going to have 74 spaces, and that's just going to spit out how many housing units we can have. So that's one of the studies we'll do. We'll say it's expensive to build structured parking. It's expensive to dig underground parking. Let's see how big of a project you can do with just, in a way, the existing parking situation. And then we will also test then, okay, well, if that's not going to yield enough housing units or hotel rooms, what can we do? So we can potentially look at structured parking and accommodating more cars. With that, it's going to be more expensive. So we're trying to find the sweet spot for enough parking that makes enough of a development for developers to be interested and invest in the project. But we also don't want to go too big so that the scale of the project is overwhelming for the neighborhood. We're trying to find the sweet spot where It's attractive to proposals for development, but it's not too big for the community. So that's kind of previewing where we're headed with our studies. This is just a quick view of this satellite lot here. And we've been tossing around the idea of could a developer who wants to do a project at the courthouse site get more cars? And could it happen on this site that's already cleared? You could potentially do a few levels without it getting too high, because it can go into the existing grade. And so we will be looking at whether more cars could happen on that site, and it could open up some potential opportunities that could unlock more interesting solutions for the main site where the courthouse is. I guess I should say we'll be looking at that for both just parking or potentially more product, if you will. It could be more housing on that site as well. So with all of that, and with the uses that are coming out of the economic study, we're going to have just a few uses that make sense, and we're going to explore all the different options of how to attack the site. So ideally, someone shows up and just, hey, the building's great, we can use it, we're going to move in basically as is, we're not going to spend a ton of money. So that's like the easiest sort of avenue of study. We were going to look at whether you could remodel the building in place for a wholly different use, but just basically use the shell. We'll look at whether we demo the courthouse. Maybe it's too expensive to remodel, maybe it just doesn't make sense, but we keep the annex. I don't know if there's going to be a lot of energy around that solution, but we can look at it. But another more likely strategy is to demo the annex. That's a big scale. It's a real hulking building within the fabric of the city, and then keep the more treasured sort of historic nature of the courthouse. You know, that kind of solution is going to make it hard to dig down, park underneath. We won't be able to park underneath the courthouse. So we've also talked about could we just keep the tower, demo the main body of the courthouse building, just keep the iconic sort of architectural treasure. And then we certainly will look at, okay, let's just raise the site, give the developer a clean slate, and we could do something much more efficient, and that might give a developer really what they're looking for to make something pencil out. So I'm just going to show one sample of how we are going to attack this. We aren't really designing the building. We're testing the site. How big will it be? How much mass will it have? How many units can we fit on the site? So this is just sort of an example of how we're going to go about all those different sort of categories of development. And this one is to take the existing annex building and turn it into housing. So we might open up the center of the building to bring light down. It might be a skylight. We can get units ringing that, and probably we would redesign the exterior and the costs of making it a much more sort of residential friendly architecture. And then we'll analyze number of units, square footage, how many parking spaces are required, and this will be one of the types of solutions that we'll eventually put through a cost estimate to see what kind of cost each type of strategy will come out with. You want to, anything to add to that? Yeah.
We're going to be working together on it so that what she's finding is viable and that can support the community, and that architecturally those two ideas come together. So this is just an example of how one idea might be studied. But
so we'll end up having quite a few of those types of studies, and then we'll come back to the community and show what we found.
yeah, I think we'll be hoping to narrow it down to the best, maybe top 3 or something like that.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
And I hate to take more than my fair share of airtime, but I do have a lot of experience with this stuff. And rezoning is what I end up doing anytime I'm over the height limits, or setback problem. So I'm assuming you guys have that on the table, right?
Of course,
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's all I'm asking.
Yep.
Because some people might have thought, well, if you take it to a 40-foot height limit, obviously you're gonna have to tear down the building. But that's not,
No, we would.
you guys didn't mention rezoning, so I don't want to create
It's a
that
great
kind
point.
of
It's a great
fear
point.
with people.
We're grandfathered in already. Our client is the government. We have a lot of leverage.
Okay.
I think we want to be sensitive to the rezoning though, just because of scale. I guess we want to be sensitive to not letting the building get out of scale, but still, I think, as you're maybe suggesting, is allow the zoning to flex a little bit to be able to build more substantial.
You have to change the rezoning. I mean, flex suggests a variance. I don't suggest variance, I suggest rezoning.
Rezoning.
Yeah.
We've talked about that as well.
Can you speak to the condition of the different buildings before we go into this question? Like the mold issue and the hazards, is the building on the right as hazardous as the old courthouse?
No, it's not as hazardous as the old courthouse. And there was a facility condition assessment that was done some years ago that really sort of documents the condition of those buildings. You'll find the rear side of the courthouse is really problematic. And the courthouse does have a lot of hazardous material in it as well, but it can be mitigated at a cost, of course. So, one of the things that we haven't really, that Greg sort of alluded to that we will be doing in our studies is that, so we have Dina coming up with what is the viable use for this, Greg and team coming up for what the buildings might look like. And then we also have a cost estimator that's going to be making sure that, mitigating all the hazardous materials in this is going to cost this much money. So we have the ability to take, that sort of cost into consideration as well.
When are we going to get those numbers?
Well, right now, we just want to get your feedback. We don't have any solutions yet. We want to hear what you all say. Once we have your feedback, we're going to start coming up with solutions. We're going to start pricing it out, and then we'll be presenting those to you at the next time.
There's a question in the back, a woman's heard.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. This is a historic building. What is the actual feasibility of doing any of the things that you're saying?
It's all feasible. So the building itself is not a registered building. It's in a historic registered district. So the building itself is not registered. It could become registered, we believe, if we so desire. But as of this moment, it is not registered. So it gives us a bit more leeway as to what we can do with the building. And what I understand, because it's in a historic district, it's really more of the massing that has value. So that historic tower, it has value just because of the massing of the existing building. So we have quite a bit of leeway with that, actually. And we do, just as a follow-up to that, we do have a historic architect that's on our team that's supporting us as well.
Oh, I just want to say, it sounds like someone's phone is on or something.
It's the bar next door. Next door.
Oh.
I have a question, I was wondering.
Yeah, you can go to that door, it was full.
We share a common, City Hall shares a common wall. There's a pass through, you can get a drink in the pass, that's how government.
My question is a bit general. Is the Metameter available to folks after this meeting ends? I know maybe somebody watching from home at the moment, but tomorrow?
No. The short answer is no. If you're watching remotely, you can vote right now, but the voting is live right now, and then it ends, and we'll share the results.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just have a question about the value of adding municipal parking to the whole downtown. I know that there were other proposals for that, like Clark Street, that yard down there, and then some talk about going over the freeway and making parking or something. If there was let's say it was housing and that second lot was developed into a structure, would the additional parking be a big benefit to the downtown overall? Is that a consideration?
Yeah, absolutely, that would be a consideration. And, we've experienced firsthand, and we've been hearing commentary from people just how essential parking is, to this particular area. But of course, we have to weigh. Parking is expensive, and so if we try to provide more parking than this site requires, we're asking the site to essentially subsidize. So it makes it a little bit harder, I think, to have a viable project like that. But I can tell you, we have been told how important parking is. We get it. We've been trying to work it.
Housing downtown can mitigate the parking problem. I mean,
Yes.
none of my employees can walk to work. They could walk to work from there. Lots of people working downtown can walk.
It's a fair question. I can tell you that we're not here to solve, all of the city's problems.
What?
I don't mean to be cavalier. I don't mean to be cavalier.
No, the issue is that, I'm sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I just say, as I understand it, they're being paid by the state and the county, not the city. I live in Nevada City, and so I think my interests are to somewhat, I hope not entirely, but somewhat in opposition to the interest of the state and the county in this instance, because you guys are looking for a viable project that the state can recover some money from and not be obligated to the city for demolition.
So
I sort of agree.
Yeah, so that's not accurate. Hi everyone, my name is Allison Lehman, I'm the county CEO and on the subcommittee with county staff and the city staff. And the state is not funding these studies. This truly has been a collaborative process in the front end, engaging our city council and partners. The contract is a shared contract. We worked on the scope of work together. It's been a very collaborative process, understanding that there's synergy and there's mutual interest to making sure that that building ends up being viable for the community. Without a healthy city, we will not have a healthy county. So we do not see them as separate interests at all.
I'm glad I'm not totally in opposition.
If I may add, I know we're talking about a lot of different things, and speaking of community, as was just mentioned, my biggest platform, and every time I come to these meetings, my argument always is, it still stands, is a youth component. We're talking about tearing down buildings, but I don't see anything for the youth that live in this town. We talk about an aging population, but we're guaranteed to the youth that are currently here to be able to come back home and see a viable place for them to grow up and to have a place to commune and the level of arts and culture. I see a lot of labels in this town with buildings of arts and culture, but I don't see the arts and culture. You know what I mean? I don't see it utilized in the capacity. We need a building, if you will, an annex, if you will. I don't care if you give us a square footage of this sense, somewhere where we can have youth programming for the youth. And I think and I hope that somewhere along the line, because we have very limited space, meanwhile there's a few dilapidated, rotting buildings that I would love for you to tear down, or something to that effect, so where we can have the youth that's in this community that have nowhere to go. And everyone brings up the Neo Center, but that's 1,000,000 miles away if I'm 12 and 13 years old, in comparison to all the youth who I work with personally within the community here. I live right here in town on Commercial Street, earshot from the courthouse. So those are the things that I like to think and take in consideration to have an element of that somewhere in this town where space is already limited. I do agree that of a viable project, in regards to the tourism that we rely on. But what good is that? I'm tired of the bars, as you guys are complaining right here. I'm tired of all the other beer gardens that keep coming up, but we have nowhere for the kids. All right?
Yeah, very strong point, and I saw Dina over there taking notes about it, so we will dig into that more. And I will say back to sort of the Mentimeter question here, is that I'm a little surprised at the 14, that, it's okay to get rid of the historic courthouse. That's a little surprising to me, but it's good.
Maybe it's okay.
Maybe it's okay. Right, no, I get it.
Because it said baby, it doesn't approach.
So just to reiterate, these, if you can see the picture up top, these actually highlight what exactly we're talking about, so.
No. And of course, we would build behind the tower. It's not that we would just leave the tower.
there you go.
I mean, does it seem likely that in order for it to pencil out for a developer that you have to like bring it, because you said you had some leeway with agencies as far as zoning, and that you would be wanting to bring it all up higher? Does that seem likely? Because to me, that just would, that would be totally out of place.
So I don't know that we have that, so we don't have that goal.
I don't mean like all the way up to the tower, but
above 40 feet, what we're going to try to do is find where that balance is between, what saturates the market. We obviously don't want to go overboard. We don't want to build too much. And so it's going to be Dina being able to help us figure out, okay, 12 units would be ideal. Or if she says 500 units is ideal, then we try to maximize out the site. But we really need to find out what that sweet spot is before we can answer that question. And of course, one of the things that we talked about is community support. I suspect that we're not going to get much community support for a 12-story tower that takes up that entire site. So that would be, off the table. Even though it's possible that we could get that through. San Francisco did it with the new tower. We can, there's things that are available to us, but we're trying to find the right balance of things.
Additionally, almost the entire historic courthouse right now sits above the line that should.
But it would be grandfathered in. It's not
correct. What's there is grandfathered, but
I think we have a bias that the new project doesn't go up above the historic building. We sort of honor the building, let it stand, the most proud thing. The same with the way the annex building comes far forward from the front of the courthouse. Ideally, it'd be nice to draw some line and hold it back just a little bit so the courthouse isn't hidden, so to speak.
I'm curious on this one.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is there a concentration of the hazmat in one or the other buildings?
Well, the older building has more hazardous material than the newer building does.
So they both have hazardous materials in them, or?
I believe they both have hazardous materials.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Can anyone speak to kind of the significance of that building? Because I like it personally. I think it's odd and weird and cool and kind of a different era, which shows off what we have in the historic district. Can anyone speak to sort of its historical significance, if there is any?
So I don't think it would be available to be registered in.
Yeah, no, I don't mean as a registered building.
I'm quite fond of the building.
Yeah, it's all glass.
From an architectural perspective.
Yeah.
Now,
So is there anybody from the Historical Society here?
There's no time for taste. We all have different tastes.
We all have different tastes.
I thought it was 67. Yeah.
Because there's not a lot of love for it.
It was a WPA project.
The tower is.
The tower, yeah.
It is.
It also doesn't fit the rest of the
So most of the feedback that we've been hearing is been sort of derogatory toward the annex building.
Yes.
But I've been surprised by some of the answers we've been getting here tonight, and I'm open to being surprised more. That's the whole point of having this meeting, right?
I think it's derogatory because there's sort of this split in this community between wanting to be sort of a preserved, piece of history preserved, and wanting to let things progress and change.
Right.
And interestingly, that building from the 60s is different and new.
Right.
And so, for me, as someone who grew up here, I grew up with that building, and I actually find it really interesting and charming. Architecturally, it doesn't fit the sort of concept that a lot of people want or move here for, but I think it's worth asking the question to more than 30 people in a room about what we think we should do with that.
And maybe what is historical.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
seems to be the
Where do
crux
we
of
draw that
Is
line?
it the story of what we've done?
Exactly.
Or is it the
Victorian
Edition
exactly.
of it, and since the courthouse isn't that either, it
Exactly.
feels like that shouldn't drive.
Exactly. I agree.
And that's the hard part about this process, because she might be able to convince all of us that we should keep it.
I would love that.
Where does she get to make her argument? When does she get to make her argument?
She's making it.
Here I am, that's why I showed up.
I want to add that
If we change these votes, I don't think we can.
I believe you can. I'm pretty sure you can go back and change it.
We have a question back here.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify, like, as far as hazards go, there's been a lot of talk about it being hazard, built with hazardous materials and then mold mitigation issues and whatever else is going on the backside. Currently it is legally in use as an occupied building, and so if it were to be reoccupied by another tenant of any kind, would that mean that it would need to be remediated, or can it be occupied as is?
Great question, and it depends on the situation, but I can say most hazardous materials, once you start to remodel things, that's when it starts to become a problem. Right now, most of the hazardous material is contained, but as soon as you start to pull it apart, it becomes a problem.
So as far as the cost effectiveness, it would be very cost effective to not remodel it.
That would be much cheaper, no doubt. Yes, sir.
Does this site have to be monetized? In other words, couldn't we just leave the tower and make the rest a park, for instance? We won't be making any money, but that's the question.
Well, that would be taxpayer money there. So it comes to what the government funding is available.
Are there seismic issues?
Yes.
And on both buildings?
Yes, I believe so. Yep.
And that is some of the heavier costs, the heavier remediation cost is more the seismic.
That's a significant cost. Yeah.
Asbestos abatement.
Couple questions. So somewhere in the beginning, you talked about like the building would be, the property was going to be sold to a developer. So I mean, is that the decision? Like it's not, we might do this, we might do that. It's going to be put up for sale. That's what it sounded like, right?
Well, I think the point.
I was just going to say, one of the biggest challenges that we've talked about, so everybody knows, is that the site's going to require $15 to $20 million in remediation, right? So.
Well, we don't know what we're doing yet.
Yeah, but somewhere in that ballpark, from $10 to $20 million, right?
That sounds reasonable.
And that's got to be factored into anything we really talk about here. And so that's sort of, I think, why we're going towards developers, because they have the deeper pockets, housing, et cetera. But if the state were to pony up $20 million, we would have a lot of other options to do it, because that we wouldn't have to factor in that cost.
Absolutely.
Who owns the property now?
So the state owns 51% and the county owns 49%. It's my understanding that the state wants to divest themselves of ownership. Now, what that arrangement is, I'm not part of.
So feel free to write your congressman.
Yes.
It's the state, you're assembling member.
And your assembly members, actually no levels, your assembly members. Feel free to write the state.
Have a question?
Just, I wanted to quickly clarify, it is $10 to $20 million if you do a remodel on the site. Right now it's grandfathered in. So if the building stays as is, it's a cost of zero. Right, Doug?
I don't know. I think that there's some other, to make it viable.
Well, I'm just asking if the site continues to stay in its current state, is it $0 to reoccupy? Or does it require any mitigation towards reoccupying?
That's a Heidi.
Well, the
roof was leaking. There are maintenance issues that are long overdue, and we've had trouble getting the state to fix them. The building needs work, no matter what.
Foundation, seismic stuff, and that kind of stuff.
You don't know that yet, and again, it depends on what the use would be, but it's 99% certain something needs to be done with it.
Of course,
to be used.
Yeah.
when you change a use of some.
Online people could hear.
I'm sorry?
I just said, please use microphone so the online.
Oh,
people
thank
can
you.
hear.
when you change the use of a building, you are going to be required to come up to current code in those areas. And so very likely it's going to be expensive to renovate, remodel the facility. Because it's not going to be a court again. We know that.
I don't think your scenario of the zero cost with some new occupant of the building would fly. It would have to be brought.
Even if it remained government
Yeah,
use.
it's not usable. It's why the courts, if you see the building, half the building is shut down because you can't access it with water and mold. So it is marginally useful in its current situation. And also, as noted, it's not going to remain a court, and the codes, the state codes alone, would require you to move anything in there. You're going to be doing Title 14. You're going to be doing ADA. You're going to be doing all kinds of things just by changing the use of it. And since it's not going to be a court, there are going to be significant costs accrued. But also the other piece of it is that building is at risk right now with the water leaks and everything else. So.
I have one question briefly about the cost of remediation that was mentioned. Would that cost apply to demolition as well? Like, would that $10 to $20 million pay for the demolition of the building in order to remediate all of its toxics away?
Well, there's different types of remediation. It's when you're going to be reusing the building in its current state, you have to do remediation when you're changing things around. But when you demolish it, you still have to remediate it. You have to take special care when you demolish things like that. There's airborne particles that become problematic. So there's even cost associated with demolishing it.
I guess my point is towards, well, you can spend $10 to $20 million to get it fixed up to do something to, or you can spend the same $10 to $20 million to level the site and have a blank slate, which is one of the discussed options.
I think they're saying that you have to spend that money anyway, and then you have to do the demolishing on top of that. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it might be a little less to do the demo option, but they definitely go in and remove all the hazardous stuff before the full demo team goes in. So you do have to spend that money. Yeah.
But yeah.
They probably just don't have to take as much care, into salvaging.
It's a good question, and I can just assure you that any of the options that we propose, we're going to be cost estimating what it is to do that work, including, the remediation work, including the demolition work. One of the reasons why Greg was mentioning about underground parking is because we've learned that there's a lot of rock under these facilities, and it's very expensive. Once you start digging out rock, it starts to get, too expensive. So whatever option we come up with, we will have a general idea of the cost, and it will allow us to weigh, this is kind of what you're trying to do, is weigh the pros and cons of these different things. And so we are going to accommodate, I think, the bigger picture of what your question is about.
When you finally give some of your options, who decides what the final decision is?
Oh, that's like the perfect question right now. We're about ready to move into that. So the next agenda item is evaluation, and we like to come up with the evaluation criteria before we've created the options. And so that way it's kind of more, justice being blindfolded, right? You don't know what it is. You haven't come up with the criteria after you've already picked a favorite. So that's the next item that we're going to be talking about. So thank you for the segue. Okay, so this is just an open question here about, what other, if you have anything that you want to add about what we should consider with the design, this is sort of a free-form response time.
This is the time?
This is it.
In your phone.
If you want it to be documented forever in the phone.
Excuse me though, would there be other options for folks to write to you or email and add to this?
Yeah, I think do you want to talk about what the county, there's a website?
So, yes, we're starting the community process, and staff, feel free to jump in. This is just the beginning of the community process. We have a long runway, and so it will have different opportunities for the public to engage, and ultimately it will be coming to the city council and to the board of supervisors at some point for a decision. There'll be a public process there as well.
And as we were saying at sort of the outset, is that this is the first community meeting. We're gonna absorb all the feedback that we received tonight. We're going to look at the comments that we get, and we're gonna continue doing our work, and we're gonna come back with a few options that fit all of the different criteria that we've been discussing, and we'll continue to discuss tonight, and we'll give you an opportunity to provide more feedback at that time.
Research center.
I'll give this just another couple minutes, or 1 minute. I don't want to shortcut anybody. I think some people are not taking this seriously.
It probably happens at this point.
Okay, I know this meeting is going on long, but we appreciate your feedback. I think they're barely scroll down. I think I'll break it if I do that.
Oh, okay.
Okay, everyone get an opportunity?
Will you read some of them? I can't see that.
Yes. City-managed public parking. Youth Use Rock Climbing Gym and Tower. Definitely keep both buildings. Not tall all the way across the site. Gondola to the top of Sugarloaf Mountain.
My favorite.
All right, I think we can end this meeting now. Makerspace community meeting, room space, youth space operated by county. So there's a nice mixed bag of ideas here. So we've got a creative group out here.
We'll publish all these also after the meeting.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're getting to the evaluation part. So we'll see how this goes. Okay, so I'll take them.
Yep.
Thanks. So what we've done here is we've taken a first stab at what is a reasonable way to evaluate options. So imagine, if you will, that after hearing all of your feedback, we've gone back to our desks and we've done all of our research, and we've developed 3 options that we think fit what we've talked about here today and fit sort of the general idea of highest and best use. So what we asked of the steering committee, and what we're now asking of you all right now, is to take these ideas that are most important to you and try to translate them into a way so that we can fairly evaluate these different options that we've developed. And so what we've done here on the left side is we've listed out some of these values or ideas that we think are important to the success of this project. So that's what you see here on the left-hand side. And I'll read them. Option evaluations. And what we've done is we've given an example for one option. So what we'll likely do is we'll have probably an option 2 and an option 3, and we'll score all 3 of these options fairly. That's the goal anyway. And so what we've also done is that we've given a weight to each one of these pieces because we don't think that they're all as important as the other one. All right, so now I'm just going to sort of read through what we talked about are the values that we think are important. And it really is, number 1, it's values. And that's talking about the community. And we've divided values into 2 pieces. The other part that we have is viability. And we've been talking a lot about viability tonight. And we've taken viability and we've divided up into 4 different pieces. Okay, So back to values. First one we have is community support. And we've given that a weight of 20%. And these all add up to 100, so makes the math a little bit easier. The next one of value is balance of historic and proposal. And so this also talks to, we've been talking a bit about the historic value of the building. We've been talking about the historic district, but it also is a bit about sort of the site itself. And so, with this, we've given, a lesser value. We've given it at 5%. So both of these together for values is about, it's exactly 1/4 of the total value. Viability, which in the steering committee in our discussions, viability was the most important idea. If it's not going to be sustained, if we're not going to get interest, if nothing's going to happen here, this doesn't do anybody any good. So viability was the most important. And we looked at in terms of financial feasibility. And so, and actually, Dina, you can probably talk a little bit better about financial and market viability, or you can correct me.
Well, market, sometimes there's demand for a product, but not the price that people are willing to pay. Say there's a lot of demand for housing, but it's demand where people can only pay $1 for an apartment, and for a developer to want to build the apartment, they have to achieve $2 per unit so that's where the market is different than the financial feasibility. So where the demand is coming from a segment. And there are ways to work around that, which we can talk about, particularly on housing and affordability. But we wanted to split those pieces apart.
Right. So we gave financial feasibility the highest weight of 35%. We gave market viability 25%. So you can see those are pretty heavily weighted, but maybe not even enough. We'll see. So next up is longevity, adaptability. And so what this means is that whatever solution that we come forward with, we want to make sure that it works today, but that it also works tomorrow. We don't want to have something that only lasts for 2 years and then disappears. We're just, we don't want to push the pain down to another period of time. And then so that's 10%. And then the last one is impact on local businesses. So for example, we don't want to create a restaurant complex up here that now is going to be competing against the restaurant complex on Broad Street already. So what we want to do is we want to complement the existing businesses in the area, and hopefully what we do here actually supports them as opposed to competes to them. So that's what impact on local businesses is about, and we've put that at 5%. So I believe now I ask if there's any questions about this.
Yeah, we have a Mentimeter.
So in this one, we're asking, okay, of the criteria that we described right now, are we missing anything that you think is important that we should have included? And I think I can toggle back to hours without breaking this, but we'll see. So you can see, I'm going to try to get it so that you can see the evaluation criteria. Can you still type into it? Is it working? Okay. No, I'll put them up, but I just thought that maybe somebody wanted to be reminded of what we have before they. So it's community support, historic balance, financial feasibility, market viability, longevity, adaptability, and impact on local businesses. So I'll go back. Yes.
Would you say longevity is the same as sustainability?
Well, that's a trick question. So in one sense, of course it is, yeah. But I would also, one of the things that maybe I didn't hit on as well as I should have with longevity is part of longevity in our mind is also adaptability. So we realize that we don't have a crystal ball and we can't see 10 years into the future. But what we can do is make sure that whatever we're doing now is flexible enough so that as the world changes, this project can change along with it without being too much. Now, sustainability, if you're talking about from sort of an environmental perspective or in a broader sense, I'm not sure.
I was specifically thinking of you had financial feasibility. Is that financially feasible or is it financially sustainable over time? This is a project that
Yes.
can continue to sustain itself.
Got it. So that's where I think that is, of course, that would be part of the initial financial viability, would be being able to remain financially viable for a time period. But longevity, I think, actually speaks most directly to that. Okay. And so I see one comment here, community support should be more heavily weighted. So the next question, and I shouldn't be giving this a prize, but the next question is to ask you how you feel about the weighting of things. So you'll be able to specifically respond to that. Global warming, environment, community need, good breakdown, thank you. Timeline, how quickly can something be done? That's actually very smart. Alignment with the city's strategic plan, yep. The value of reuse and considerations of sustainability and climate change. Impact on the current neighborhood, private homes, apartments. Impact to the downtown community beyond businesses, for example, on residents and on kids. Value to direction of public good, impact on taxpayers. All, I don't see a gondola on here anywhere. Okay. Does anyone, so I'm going to move on to the next question unless people are still typing or anyone wants to comment on anything. What is that? Oh, someone's still voting? Okay. So what we're asking you to do here, and you might think this is tricky using Mentimeter, but I think once you give it a try, you'll find out it's actually pretty straightforward. We'd like you to sort of evaluate which of these are the most important to you.
You can reorder these on your phone. It took me a while to figure this out.
Just slide it up.
So you can just move these things up and down.
It's a huge issue. There's no doubt.
Can we add it? We can't add anything
No,
yet.
we got comments already. So to this list, we got.
In addition to dragging and dropping, can I
to this list we can't add it.
Somebody who is more tech savvy than me probably could, but I'm sorry. No, I can't add that to this list here.
What was it that you're asking? Global warming.
Seems like it should be a concern.
Yeah.
residents?
So you can only vote once, but you should be able to sort all 6 in order. So if you tap, the first one you tap will go to the top, but you can drag and drop them.
And I will say, to some extent, I think community support, which I'm seeing is getting a lot of votes here, community support can be somewhat of a catch-all for any concerns that you have, right? It can be global warming, it can be, for, programs for youth. That's kind of what community support is about. It isn't any one thing, right? It's all of the ideas that, the community has.
Financial feasibility is black and white. Community support is not. That's
Correct.
what we have on
Yeah, agreed.
it. So, of all this, it's kind of vague.
It is, and it's an imperfect process, and the evaluation is imperfect as well. But we're here to try to make it more perfect.
We're also noting down your points, so the concept of global warming, I mean, I assume that you're referring to a smart land use pattern that supports the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So we might not rank that as a criteria for a variety of reasons, but it would certainly be part of potentially a narrative discussion of what the value of this is, to your earlier point, about what kinds of uses here could be financially feasible and support compact smart growth, for example. Yeah.
Right. And to the market viability side of things, this is also just when we put out our proposal, are we actually getting anyone who's going to be interested in doing it? That's kind of what that's how I view market viability. Is we want to get somebody interested in doing what we want. So I guess that's my pitch for market viability.
We've got 27, so.
Okay, awesome.
See, Mentimeter wasn't too bad, was it? It was kind of fun, right? Oh.
Okay, so we will open it up for final comments, but I would appreciate if you have anything that you can type down here. We're starting to wrap things up a little bit. We'll get into next steps here as well, but if you have any final thoughts, ideas, or feedback on sort of what we've been talking about here today, now is a good time to do that.
So yeah, I guess as far as market viability, I think there's a lot of need for worker housing in this area. I don't think the market's going to support worker housing in this downtown. I think they're going to want too much for the housing. I don't think workers are going to be able to afford it. So it would have to be subsidized if you were looking at housing. I think the best use for this building would be to keep it public and make it open to the public. A library has been very strongly recommended by the community. There's a petition. I think there's no public use space in this town. There's a tiny little park at the end of Broad. We need space in this town that's open to the public. I think we could use this as an opportunity to change the narrative from financial sustainability and the economics of the town to what we actually value, which is space for the community to use for free. We can't use this town unless you have money, and a lot of people don't. So that's my input.
I would also like to piggyback off of these comments as well. Sorry, didn't mean to steal your thunder up there. We don't have the closest children's museum we have is either in Sacramento or Truckee. I don't know if you guys know that. I think that having an interactive community space, not only for children, but also for teens, a makerspace would be a very, very good use of our money. There is a lot of grant funding behind that. I used to run a makerspace at Chabot Space and Science Center in Oakland. We went from grant funding of $20K to $75K in the span of a year with what we were doing. There's a lot of investment happening in community spaces like that, a lot of community investment in terms of small businesses being able to start from spaces like that, educational learning, peer learning, communication, community-based organizations working together in spaces that are oriented for the community. So just really wanting to push a community-focused space that is education-oriented, to what our friend was saying earlier today about having youth spaces. I think we are severely lacking in this community besides park spaces, which we have a good amount, and that's great. But there are so many other ways that we could be using space like this that is already public.
I've already handed the microphone over to this. Okay, go ahead.
I want to echo the library idea because I grew up on Piety Hill, and when I was a kid, I could walk to the library. My children live off of Searles. We live off of Searles now, and I don't send my children across Highway 20 to go to the library. they're 13 now, so now I've just started, but I literally make them go down to the stoplight. It's kind of ridiculous that the library is out there. You might have already heard this comment from a lot of locals. So I just wanted to echo that, library space.
I'm curious, if you were to leave just the tower, how much of the existing building would be taken away? I mean, what would the tower consist of?
Well, we don't know what's going into the buildings yet, and honestly, we just wanted to get the temperature of, sort of the community. We were under the impression that this tower had great significance to the community, and we wanted to see if, and I'm hearing that that's not quite as important as I thought in this room. Right. But, so what would go into that? I don't know.
I think he means like at what point.
What configuration, if you just kept the tower,
Yeah.
what kind of configuration would you be seeing? I mean, would they chop off the back of the building or?
Yeah. That's exactly what it would mean. They would demo everything but the tower. They would reinforce it. Then they would put structural, components to keep it upright, and then they would build behind it.
Likely.
So it's a facade.
It would be a
Yes,
facade.
exactly.
Monument.
An edifice.
All of these are great.
All correct. Anyone else?
Brought you the signatures of over 300 people that would like a library in town. And with some, with the petition and all that.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Okay, so we'll move on to next steps. I don't know, Heidi, if you want me to take that, or if you have anything.
Why don't you go ahead, you're wrapping it up.
Yeah, we're wrapping it up. I don't want, if anyone else has any more comments, we've got, we're here. But generally what we're going to be doing, and I've kind of alluded to this as we've been talking, we're going to be absorbing all of the information that we got from you here today. We're happy to publish the results of what we've all collectively done here today. I believe it's going on to your website. So it'll be accessible for everyone to review. So again, what we're going to be doing is absorbing all of the comments that we've received here tonight. We're going to be going back. Dina and her team are going to be doing additional economic studies, trying to sort of fine-tune what we think is sort of a viable use for the site. All signs seem to be pointing toward housing at this point in time, as you all heard earlier. And then we will be collaborating with Dina, we being the architects, collaborating with Dina to try to figure out how big does it need to be? Can we reuse the courthouse? Can we reuse the annex building? And ideally, we'll come up with 3 different options that fit what we think matches what we are all talking about for the highest and best use for this site. We will have a general cost estimate on what the construction costs of this will be, and we'll have more information on the economic viability. We will have done a preliminary scoring of the 3 options as well. And so we'll come back to you and we'll present all of this much more firm ideas of what can happen to get your feedback at that point in time.
Can you fix up your grammar while you're at it?
If it lets us fix grammar, we will.
So I just want to say thank you to everyone who showed up, and tell your friends. We messaged this meeting hard, so there may be people online. I don't know how many people are listening online. But this was your chance to be early, to get your ideas in early. The next one, they'll be starting to get baked in, but we'll still be taking your input. So please tell your friends and people you know when they hear about this meeting to show up, or when we do the presentation, at the next presentation at the Board of Supervisors, to come and give us your input.
When will this group meet again?
I think we said winter.
Yeah, we haven't picked a date, but we message it everywhere, through everything.
I mean, a year, a month?
Like last January or February.
Yeah, January, February. Yeah.
The first quarter of next year.
And we bring these folks out and give you all this time to, so thank you for coming out. Thank you all for showing up.
Thank you. Thank you.
doing this. It was a really good process, and I really just appreciate that you want to hear from the community.
Nice.
Because it doesn't have to go this way, and it goes this way because of our leaders.
Nice.
So,
Agreed.
I'm from the local newspaper. Yeah, just